Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Deep Executive. My name is Dr. Siana Musimi. I am the CEO of Ipsos Human Capital, and today we are joined by the very experienced technologist, and she would have made a huge impact on most of our lives, especially if you live in the UK, Sarah Greasley. Sarah has been CTO of Direct Line, CTO of IBM, and Director Solutions Architect EMEA of AWS. And I might just add, she's done all that whilst raising two children and as a single mother. So for those of you who always debate about whether women should do one or the other, raise a family or have a successful career, I keep bumping into people who do both very successfully. Anyway, welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So suppose the first thing we'll jump into, Sarah, obviously perhaps the most important, is we'll talk about Wimbledon and tennis. How did you find Wimbledon this year, and obviously Andy Murray's last?
It was very emotional, that last the last time he was on centre court.
Yeah.
So it was just a shame that we didn't see him playing mixed doubles, but yes, it was fantastic to see him.
Was it the right sending off, the last hurrah? Do you think he could have done more?
It's always difficult to know when to finish.
Yes.
Always difficult to know when to end. I think he would have liked, and I think we probably would have liked to see him finish on a high.
Yes.
But he's just been, playing tennis for so long. He's been in our lives for so long that it was a pleasure to see him.
Great. Sarah, which tennis player do you think would make the best executive, and why?
Wow, so that's a big question. I actually believe that every successful tennis player today is acting as a CEO. Right? They are running a small company.
Right.
They have their team around them. If you look at what we see today in whether it's Federer, whether it's Djokovic, whether it's Alcaraz, they have a team. Right? They have physios, they have publicists, they have nutritionists, they have family, they have everyone around them,
yeah.
Right? They build a team
yeah.
to whose sole objective and purpose, really clear, is to make them successful,
right,
for as long as possible.
Okay.
Right. So I think if you're not successful at building that team around you, then it is much harder to be a successful tennis player in today's world. And
who do you think? So basically, are you saying the most successful tennis players would make the most successful executives?
I think that's But if you look at Federer, if you look at Djokovic,
yeah.
if you look at Murray, everyone from that era, and even today when you think about Alcaraz and you think about Sinner, they are, they're building the team. They have the team that is going to help them to be successful.
Right. All right. So Sarah, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I just thought that given what's happened with the English national football team, I would ask this. Now, England lost the final to Spain, and the English fan base has been split into two camps: those who thought he didn't do enough, those who thought he was kind of tactically challenged or had reached his limits, and then there are those who thought he's done. England has been. The last time England was this successful was when they won the World Cup. They've had very good runs. And so my thought is, and I think I was pretty right in this because I did some research, this completely reflects the culture and attitude of the C-suite. So you've got a chap called Mark Bullingham, who is the CEO of the FA, and he wants Southgate's successor to be an ambassador of English football, to be a face of everyone rising through the ranks, the kids and everything, and therefore Southgate's successor has to be English. And then you've got the person below him, John McDermott, the technical director, who just wants to deliver trophies. So the best coach that's out there, whether they're from England or Timbuktu, they'll get them and try to win. Now, obviously, the former, because he is more senior, his philosophy, his approach has prevailed. Have you seen this type of dynamic? Does it sound familiar? Is basically the question.
Yes, it does sound familiar, and I think we can all have a common objective right here, which is clearly for England to win a trophy.
Yes.
And I think we'd all agree that's what we want to do. But I think the challenge is in actually how you do that, right? What are the characteristics of the person that you need to make that happen, right? You know, when you reflect back on Gareth Southgate, one of the things that I think you have to recognise him for was, you know, his ability to take responsibility, to be responsible, to recognise what wasn't working and change it, right? I think, and to give the players a platform within which to excel, right? But I think, by the same token, I would say one of his biggest challenges is not so much is he an ambassador for English football, it's actually could he create a team out of some people who have, over the years, been lauded for their individual contribution, whether it's Harry Kane or Jude Bellingham, they are lauded for that individual contribution.
Yeah.
And I think it's managing that dichotomy, which is really hard.
Okay. This might be more a question for me, but I'll throw it to you. So you've been a CTO. Would you say you were hiring an assistant, or perhaps you became a CEO one day through this route, and you needed to fill a CTO, VP IT position, and you had two people, a brilliant technologist who's good at who's built up lots of stuff and different IT capabilities for the size of the company you're working at, or you've got this other person who was an average technologist but is a great collaborator, a great team leader. They know how to manage different stakeholders and the board and all that.
So I think you look for someone who has elements of both, right? I talk about T-shape, right? So someone who has, you know, I'm looking for, so in a CTO, you look for someone who can do all of those things, who can be a team player at the board level, but by the same token, they have a unique capability, which is to understand technology, to be able to translate that technology into business speak. So therefore they have to have that breadth of understanding of the business, how the business works, and the dynamics that are happening at board level.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's a political answer. I did want you to choose one, but I will still take it.
Well, okay, so
you don't.
Let me answer it.
Okay, right.
Let me answer it.
Okay,
right? No,
sure.
not, you know, I can I can recruit a technologist, right, and they don't have to sit on the board, right? So I can find people who are fantastic at understanding how quantum is going to change, understanding how AI is going to change an industry, it's change a customer, change all sorts of things. I can find those technologists, right, much more easily than I can find someone who can articulate for the board, who can explain to them, you know, what these new technologies are, more importantly, what are the things they need to think about when they're looking at these new technologies, what these new technologies are capable of, and how those new technologies are going to change their business model.
Right.
And those people who bridge that business to IT gap are so rare that you know, that's what I would that is a skill and a capability that we look for every day. Okay.
So who do you think should be the next England manager?
Oh God, don't know. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I don't think we should get hung up on them being English.
Okay.
Right? I think it has to be. You know, I think we have to think very clearly, or the FA has to think very clearly. And clearly, I'm not an executive of the FA. I think they have to think very clearly about where the challenges were in the England team in our last campaign, and actually where we go from there.
Okay, all right. I'll take that, and I think I agree. It's sad that England hasn't produced the same sort of, you know, talent pool of coaches that some of the other countries have. But I think you're right. What you saw in Gareth solves serious cultural problems, which, you know, a technical coach probably couldn't do. So we do have to give him credit for that, I think.
And I think the other thing I would say, right, if I take a step back and look at this, is if you are a coach of an English football team, right, I'm sure you do have the ambition to become the English national coach, right?
Yeah.
I think because it's a completely separate organisation, and because you have the day-to-day challenges that you have of managing a football team in the Premier Division, right? How can you? It's really hard to look up. It's really hard to look ahead and go, what are the skills I need to be the England football manager? How different are they from the skills that I have today? Who is going to help me to acquire those skills, right? And that's very different from a large corporate organisation, for example, where you have people who should be thinking. One of the key attributes for me of a senior executive is to think about, where's my succession plan? What skills do those people who are sitting in the organisation today who could do my job, what skills do they need? How do I give them the experiences? How do I give them the challenges that they need in order to grow the skills that they need, right? It's a luxury to have that in a big organisation that the FA probably don't have.
Correct, yes.
We've gone completely away from wherever you thought you were going, haven't we?
No, this is actually, I didn't plan to put this in, the question, because I think I'm still recovering from Sunday.
Okay.
And I just thought, there's this huge question about who's going to be the next England manager. I just thought it would fit in quite well.
Yes.
Anyway, on to the meaty stuff of our discussion. So we've spoken a lot, Sarah, about the nature of executive teams, and whenever we talk, I've got my background in the executive set, and I'm now training leadership teams to be more collaborative. The issue of personality differences always comes in. So we'll get to that. Firstly, in order to be a good exec, there are certain attributes that, and these theories about this, one including called Peter's Principle, whereby the skills that you needed at the lower stages of your career are the sorts of skills you need to be an executive. So you've had a very successful career and you've risen through the ranks. What are the differences between being an executive and being someone else lower down the food chain?
Oh gosh, so I think there are probably two main differences. Right. One is that particularly if you've come up through technology, sometimes you come up through technology by knowing the answers, right? Yes. And the more senior you get, the less likely you are to know the answers. Right. So it's not about knowing the answers, it's about knowing the questions to ask, right? And a friend of mine always says, the question I ask is what happens if it goes wrong? Right. So, but asking the questions. And I think that's an important difference, right? I think, and aligned to that is this thing that you often progress because of what you do, not what you coach or what the team does, right? So if I'm a really good executive, then I would be looking to my team to be the people who are achieving things. Right, rather than me achieving it. Clearly, I have that ability to set the parameters and the framework within which they're working, but it's that stepping back from individual achievement that's important. I think the other thing that's important is about.
So before you say that, can I just press on a little bit more? Knowing the right question, you're basically talking about strategic skills. You need to have a bigger picture. That's what knowing the right question.
That's exactly where I was going next.
Who trains you in is it a...
Who trains you? But that was where I was going next.
Okay, right, yes, great.
Was to say the other thing that as you progress is to actually start to think more strategically. Right, so you're thinking not just about what do I need to do to make this happen in the next quarter, but actually where do I want to be in 2 to 3 years' time or 2 years' time. So, and what's the path to get there? And how do you train people to do that? I think some of it is, I'm a big fan of mentoring and coaching, right? So, using creating those coaches and those mentors who will help and ask those questions, right? And I spend a lot of time saying to people, actually, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what path you take, because if you don't know where you're going. So it's really important to have a vision or an objective right? If you think about the England football team, they have a very clear objective. They didn't get there, but actually they had a very clear objective.
Yeah.
So that objective is really important as well.
Have you ever, whilst you rose through the ranks, challenged someone you reported into for not being strategic enough?
I have done that.
How did that end?
I think so. Again, and that comes back to personality, right? I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius used to talk and the Romans. If you had a triumph, if you were victorious in a battle in Roman times, and you had a triumph awarded by the Senate, and you could ride through the Senate with your chariot and your and you'd have a slave right at your ear going, remember you are a man, you are still a man, right? So human would be better than man, but I think it is beholden. So I really believe that you need to have those difficult conversations, right? And you may not always win them, and you don't always win them. You shouldn't necessarily always win them, because the more senior you are, often the broader picture you have of things that are going on that we can't know about. Right. So doesn't necessarily mean that you're right all the time, but I think raising, the challenge is to raise those in a way that is constructive, right? And clearly you look to do that in an environment of trust.
Yes. I have to say I learned this the hard way, because I in academia the collaboration is hugely minimal.
Right.
And so when I was challenging one or two people I reported into strategy, doing it in the right way was a skill I realized I had to learn very quickly.
Yes.
How you communicate. Yes. Because I think, like you, in technology, the right answer, the same thing in academic research. There's thinking, there's right or wrong. It's never personal.
Yeah.
And I had to learn quite quickly. So it's yes, I can relate to that.
And I think again, it's about how you do this sometimes, right? So a board meeting is not the best time to bring up why have you done it like this.
Yes.
Right. It's I'm just making sure that before a big meeting, right, you have those conversations so that your answers are your questions are answered, or you've had a debate about and you've agreed on a way forward.
Yes, the softer dynamics, but they are critical.
Yes.
I actually keep telling this story in my women in leadership events or whatever. When I realized I didn't quite have this skill naturally, the one person in my life who I knew had it up to, was praised by everyone, was my own mother.
Right.
So whenever I'd visit her, I would accompany her to, she spent my whole childhood saying, keep me company to go visit auntie so-and-so and whatever, and I'd say, no, what's the point? And for a while I started doing it, and I just watch how, and she was a CEO, she founded her own law firm, right?
Cool.
And I got to see how, and raised two kids, hopefully we turned out okay. She a successful woman, but I was starting to see a skill she had.
Yes.
And I began to say, actually, Mom, this is one of the main reasons that you're successful, not so much that you were brilliant at law.
And it's that creating that network, creating that collaboration space. And I think, particularly for technical people, that can be quite hard.
So we're told.
No, it's true, right? It's hard. You come from a world that's kind of quite, ones and zeros, black and white.
Yes.
Actually, you're moving into a world where you have to read people more.
Yes.
You have to understand that, that they have other pressures, right? One of the best things you can do as a CTO is really understand the business that you're working in, right? And the pressures that they're under as well, because that helps you to make some of the decisions that you make.
So when people have this, do you think it's not so much a fallacy, but misguiding for people to start their careers thinking, well, here's a path to the top, I got my graduate job, and the better I am at this position, I'll be promoted to the next, but I'm at that position. But I'll be promoted to the next. What makes a good executive, and why is it so hard? Have we been told a lie that this person deserves a promotion because they've been here the longest and they are the best coder, etc.?
No. So I don't think that's the case at all, right? I think the days where you joined a company and stayed in it until you retired are gone.
Yes.
Right. And actually, I think people are often better for it.
Okay.
Right. I think if you stay in a company too long, you can your biases, right, become hidden, right, because you've had them for so long, almost you forget about your biases, or you forget about some of the challenges or whatever. But actually, I think you do need to move companies, and no one who is starting a career today, or even is halfway through their career, should think that it will be a linear process.
Okay. Why is it so hard to negotiate, to lead people, to be strategic, to time your inputs well? Yes.
I don't know. I think there's two things. I think one is that the sometimes the skills that you need to get to that role are different from the skills that you need in that role. I think trust is a big thing, right? We foster a level of competitiveness, and actually what you need to do is work together, right? I think often people grow up in silos, and those silos can be very particular to the business, to the industry, whatever, but you grow up in silos. And I think you really do need to understand some of the motivations of the other people in your multidisciplinary team, right? So I think so I think all of that. I think the third thing sometimes, and I go back to Marcus Aurelius, is that you don't always get told the bad news. It's really interesting because we do talk, and let me come at this from a slightly technology background to start with, right? Because we spend a lot of time as customers move to be, and we work with customers to be more and more agile.
Yes.
What agile means is actually sometimes things don't work in the way that you thought they would work, or we fail fast, or we test and learn are all good phrases that we hear within the technology organisation. But at the same time, we are in a situation where technology has become so integral to our life that we cannot let it fail, right? Whether it's in hospitals, whether it's in air traffic control.
Yes.
I mean, look at Boeing is a good example of that, right? Yeah. So you think about it like that says we've got this dichotomy in our, and I'm really talking technology here, but actually it pervades everywhere. This dichotomy between cannot fail, right, and actually cannot fail because if I fail, then I won't move on in my career, versus test and learn, do stuff quickly, etc., etc. So the management of risk, the management of probability, the clarity around what is absolutely critical that cannot fail versus what we can test and learn on, right? And all of that actually is much harder today than it probably was 15, 20 years ago, right? If ATMs failed 20 years ago, right, it didn't hit the news, but it does now.
Yes.
Right? If you can't pay for something, it's in the Daily Mail, it's in the Evening Standard on the way home. There is a problem, and so but by the same token, we have to be able to test stuff and do stuff and actually make it just much more easier to drive innovation by allowing people to test and learn and to fail fast. right? And that applies,
Yes.
right? So when you get into board level,
Yes.
right, there is the appetite for risk, maybe, and I'm making, again, depends on the board, depends on the team, etc., etc. But I think understanding the attitude and appetite for risk is a key part of building that executive team as well.
Who's responsible? I suppose the CEO.
CEO, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, how do you train someone who's, I don't know whether it's a cultural thing. I mean, I've had to go through this personally, but I haven't had to, for some reason, never felt giving bad news to my employer simply because it didn't work out well for the project or whatever we were doing. And as an academic, I mean, academic research, 9 out of 10 times you fail.
Yeah.
So I'm used to failure. But when people talked about this, I related it to some elements so I grew up in Kenya,
Right.
sometimes culture and growing up. And I remember certainly in school having to tell white lies, sometimes more than white lies. When I didn't perform well academically, or I did not, because I was afraid of the punishment that
Yes.
and so when sometimes my parents found out that I hadn't told the truth, I get into trouble. And so it was drilled into me, don't be a liar, don't be a liar, don't be a liar. But, the more I reflect on it, I thought, no, it was the fear of making mistakes.
Yes.
And
You're right, it gets inculcated at a very early age.
Yes, there you go. How do you train, whether it's for cultural reasons or personal reasons, how do you tell someone, hey, you've got this dynamic that you've grown up and you've got someone who you answer to, a boss, a few decades ago it was your parent, but you enter the same mindset where you feel that you cannot tell them when things haven't worked well, but you need to. How do you approach that?
I think that's really hard, and again, it comes back. So I think sometimes you need to celebrate things that didn't go right. You celebrate what you learned out of the things that didn't go right.
Yes.
Right, and that's particularly when you're looking at innovation, right?
Yes.
We did this, right? We didn't work, but actually this is what we learned, and this is why it's valuable because it's helped us in this way.
Yes.
Right? So taking positive lessons out of things that don't work. But we've all been in that situation where we know that the program's not going to deliver in the time that's been articulated or committed or whatever, right? And I think that's hard. And I think that, and sometimes we don't help ourselves because we make it black or white. We're like, I haven't done this, or this is not going to happen. And actually, sometimes you need to go, well, actually, this is not going to happen in quite the way that you think it's going to happen, but actually we can do this, this and this in the time.
So
right?
This is not going to happen, but here are alternatives. So already doing half the work of...
Yes.
Yeah.
I always say to people, never bring just a problem, but a problem and a solution.
Yes.
May not be the one you end up with, but it's at least a solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that we don't always do, right, and this is really relevant in the days of AI, is talk about the probability.
Okay.
Right? So, we'll commit to something at a more junior level, and by the time you get to a more senior level, it's committed, set in stone.
Yes.
Whereas actually, what you're going is, I think we've got if this and this happens, then we've got an 80% chance of meeting this time frame, right? And sometimes the assumptions don't get passed through, and the probabilities don't get passed through, and all people hear is, yes, we're going to meet the time frames, and that's something you need to kind of work your way through and make sure that you are clear on actually the probabilities, but also clear on actually things may change, and if these things in particular change, then I won't be able to do what I have said I will do.
So what's the hardest bit of news you've had to tell? And keep it as anonymous as you wish.
I think thinking back, I think the hardest conversation I've had,
yes,
right, was actually around was a technology decision, right?
Okay.
So I was leading the team that was determining the design for a very large system. Lots of different components, lots of different, it was half in cloud, half out of cloud. You know, it was one of those early programs. And I needed to undo a decision.
Okay.
Because someone at a lower level had made a decision, and I hadn't been cited on it. I don't know whether, you know, various reasons behind that. But actually I needed to undo that decision because it was not the right decision. And that took a lot of, how do we make that happen? You know, again, it was not just what happens if we go ahead, but actually what happens if we make the change, right? Yeah. So it's not just, you know, we all often focus on one side of an equation. You need to focus on both sides of that equation. And, you know, there were a lot of one-to-one conversations about, actually, can we do this? What's the impact, etc., etc. So
is it with your people in the technology function or people around the C-suite?
So it was people around the C-suite.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a technology decision, but actually it was a conversation around not just, you know, it was a conversation that we then had to have around the C-suite. Yeah.
And how did you? I mean, how big was the backlash? Was there fine, this is how it is, let's get on with it, or Sarah, you've really messed things up, or whatever?
So it wasn't, so no one said that to me to my face, clearly. No. It was, so was there a backlash? I think for a while there was a backlash. I think there was and again, I think we had to work quite hard to recreate that collaboration, right? And be very clear. The one thing we did was we put a process in place. So we made it a process rather than an individual that said, actually, this is the framework within which I want you to operate moving forward, right? So, you know, you should never, you know, I think, you know, making it into a, you should always focus on, how do we stop this? You know, first of all, let's fix this, but actually, how do we stop this happening again? Right. And that's what we did.
Okay. I like that. It's part of what we're doing, where as soon as you make a person the focus of, well, anything in a sensitive role like yours, process is always better.
Yes.
And do you think it improved things?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely the right decision was to go, stop. We need to do it this way rather than this way. That's absolutely right. But actually putting that process in place was the right thing to do as well. So you know.
Did anyone say, "Hey, Sarah, this is a very difficult decision. Thank you for being honest. I just appreciate where you are. You know." Okay, right. Yeah.
I don't think. It's, but you know, when you're operating at that leadership level, do people say, you know, thank you is a interesting word.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yes. Yes, and I've seen quite a little bit of this myself. When have you seen executives get in their own way? If I can just ask to move forward just a little bit. Yes. No, that's fine.
Okay. So, when have I seen executives get? I think the biggest way that I've seen executives get in their own way is executives who don't listen.
Yes.
You know, they who really operate in a command and control rather than collaboratively in a coaching way, who don't take the time to build. It's not just building trust; it's maintaining trust, right? And their team.
So here's the people who make it to the top. I wrote an article on the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He's got a personality type, that only comprises about 15% of executives around the world, or something like that. Reflective, judgment. He's a bit of an introvert. Why is it that these people who have the command and control style, why is it that they usually rise to the top?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. And I think I would push on this. The difference between, actually, if you're an expert and you know what you're doing, it's very easy to be seen as decisive. Right?
Okay. Yes.
The more you become someone who's reliant on their team, the more you become someone who's enabling their team to make more decisions themselves, right? In many respects, you can seem less decisive, right? And I think people, a lot of senior people actually look for someone to be decisive, right? And so it's an interesting balance to be able to manage that, to be seen, to be doing, to be not taking all the decisions yourself, because then you disempower your team, you take trust away, right? But at the same time, you need to be seen to be decisive at more senior levels, right? Because you need to be seen to be on top of what's going on. You need to understand, to have that strategic view, to be able to, make those, to be able to set the direction at that level. But at the same time, you need to be, working as part of the team, and that takes time.
Yes.
A lot of people don't spend the time as senior execs. They assume that everyone else can operate, or their team will operate in a particular way, which may or may not happen.
Is it simply a question of people who have this personality type, or is this just are there deeper insecurities there, the imposter syndrome that we keep talking about? Is it a mix of all these sorts of things?
It's possible. I think competition is also,
yes, of course,
which can be seen as imposter syndrome. But actually, so I think it's a mix of all these. Yeah.
And so this clearly gets in the way of collaboration, and you mentioned competition. What have you seen, and what's the worst that you've seen in terms of a personality in leadership just being one of the major factors of why a particular team, a particular function, or even entire entity couldn't progress, couldn't solve its problems? Obviously, you can't name any names, but perhaps if you could talk a little bit about the personality type and the effect it had on the team around.
That's oh gosh, can I talk about that? Wow.
Person A.
Had
problem
I think,
X.
Oh gosh. I'm like sitting here thinking, I can't talk about that. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen actually is where the market changed.
Yes.
And the organisation did not understand how to, not so much did not understand that the market had changed, but did not understand what was driving the people on the ground, right? And often that's sales targets or whatever, to act in a certain way. So so they didn't, I can't, it's really difficult, so don't, it's really difficult to do this without being specific in any way, but fundamentally, yes. I have seen leadership not work, right? Where no one was prepared to have that open, difficult, challenging conversation, not just with the CEO, but in this case with a number of the, I would call them the big beasts.
Okay,
right? People who've been in a particular role, within the organisation for quite a long time. They have entrenched views and perspectives, and they weren't working as part of a team.
Right. Okay. Harvard Business Review say that poor collaboration in the C-suite can cost a company up to 21% of profit. My personal opinion, from what I've seen, both in executive search and with Ipsos, is that this figure might be a bit conservative. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an average, isn't it?
Could it be as bad
I
as?
think there'll be some companies.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, when you go right, I've talked a lot about very large companies. A lot of my experiences in very large companies or working with very large companies.
Yeah.
But actually, if you go right down to startups, right, there is one of the things that I think people look at is the personality of the CEO or the founder. Right, and that I am convinced there are startups that never get beyond the drawing board or never get beyond that first round of funding, because the person with the really bright idea is not always the person who can grow and scale that startup.
Right.
So the startup dies. Right. So I don't know whether Harvard measures that or not, but I also know that some companies, who have struggled with collaboration and at the C-suite. I don't know. Is it 21%? Is it? Who knows, right? We don't always know what goes on in the C-suite. We don't see those discussions. It's very hard to.
Yes, and you can't measure it. Further down the food chain. Here's a question here: how much do you trust your director, or how much are you happy?
Exactly.
They don't, and even if you did,
No.
they wouldn't give an honest answer. All right, thank you, Sarah, and over to you.
Wow, thank you. So, and I appreciate, when you think, and we talked quite a lot about personality. So, what sort of, how big a factor is personality in executive search?
So, there's what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So first of all, it's critical. And it surprised me how critical it is. So when you get an executive search assignment, you give a sort of the brief is, right, this person needs to have 5 years in this and this company size, etc.
Yes.
And one of the factors is a certain type of personality. Now, this is where executive search comes into its own and distinguishes it from normal recruitment, because executive search is hot on candidate assessment. We have to speak to. I'd have to talk to candidates for about an hour, sometimes longer, because it's our job to suss out who this person is.
Yes.
Because we cannot go to the client with... there's this thing called cultural fit that was very new to me coming out of academia.
Right.
And for me, I thought it was pretentious and soft and rubbish. I just thought, if you're good, get in and do the job. So it is critical, and I think it is perhaps the most determining factor, as you've seen. If you go back to my earlier question, if you can find someone who, the way I saw it, the best candidates never got the position, and I had to rethink what I thought the best candidate was.
Best.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was all about cultural fit. Now, Thomas Friedman said that 70% of executive hires fail because of lack of cultural fit, and only 11% because of the capabilities and their core functions.
Yes, and I think that's fair. And I think one of the biggest, one of the biggest challenges for CEOs or executive search is that balance between someone who aligns very closely in terms of cultural fit,
yes,
and someone who actually allows you to have a diverse conversation at the boardroom.
I was going to get into that, because very few hiring executives understand that distinction and understand that need. So the most collaborative C-suites actually are the what I found the least diverse. Now, it's a tricky thing to say, because I've run women in leadership and so on. They're usually a group of people who they they work for this large company, and there was this toxic situation, and so they founded their own thing as partners, and they never want to replicate that, working the sort of conditions under that boss, etc. This is what I've seen, right? And I've worked with a few executive boards. They have many blind spots, and I'll get into the diversity issue, but they act as a team. So when they're looking for someone to either replace one of them or to work under them, the fit will determine. And now I always thought that this is wrong, and I wasn't senior enough in executive search to challenge a client directly. But as I went on, I began to see how sensitive these roles are in terms of culture. Now, that's the let's call it the good side. The good side is it improves collaboration. Good culture improves things like collaboration.
And it can lead to groupthink.
And groupthink, yes. Now, the bad.
Yes.
Blind spots.
Yes.
One of the bad sides is that, how do I put this? Any homogenous group in any sort of entity in life, whether they're talking about diversity in leadership or in society, in politics, whatever, will just have blind spots.
Yes.
They won't see what anyone else sees. And whenever I try to explain diversity to leaders, people think it's this, oh, well, we've got a woman on the board, so she's going to invent this new technology. I'm like, no, it's not that. No. It is, I give an example of some part of a dance school, and when we had our first Chinese executive member on the board, it was something as simple as, hey guys, there are lots of Chinese dancers in London, they don't know where to go, I'll put something on my platform. Right. And next thing you know, 3 months later, half our society was Chinese and full of brilliant dancers. It helped us so much. And that was it. None of us would have thought of that if it wasn't for her or had that outreach.
Exactly.
You don't need to, that's what innovation is. So the bad side of culture is that we have our biases.
Yes.
And they are self-confirming.
Yes.
And if you have a homogenous culture, other people confirm it.
Yes.
And one, you miss out on innovation, and two, you're now leading, especially the larger organization. You're probably leading diverse teams.
Yes. Yes.
You've got people issues. You've got to recruit more people, or you've got high attrition problems or whatever, and the CEO is going to go to the head of HR and say, why didn't you? We're having a high attrition problem. Give them more motivations, give them more, perhaps a larger bonus or etc. or something like that, or reduce their working day by half an hour or something like this. And the chief people officer was hardly ever in a position to say, perhaps your team needs to change. And when it was usually a lady, when she'd say this, it's something that they didn't want to hear.
Yes.
So that collaboration is quite high, but the biases and the effects of that are even bigger. So that's the bad. The ugly is this outright toxicity. I will never forget this case, a CISO search, Chief Information Security Officer. The CEO, very command and control, to use your word, and goes to this CEO summit or something, and they're talking about this new IT security system, and the person giving this talk, sells it. Says, X% people who don't have this will have an attack in the next 6 months, and everyone else is doing it, and he realizes his company isn't doing it. So anyway, he makes this public announcement that, hey guys, we're going to be going down this direction. I kid you not. He did not tell his CISO before the comms went out. So after the decision is made, the CISO, and he calls me and says, Siano, you wouldn't believe what just happened. And the CISO has to explain to his boss why the threats talked about in this talk have already been considered in the current system.
Yes.
And I think it was in the cost of almost about 10 to 12 million pounds. The boss conceded that, okay, fine, this is wrong. We can't undo our communications. We can't tell people, well, we've decided to do this. Actually, we're not going to anymore. So for about a year, about 10 million pounds just went down the
I know. Yes.
So that's the
Yes.
ugly.
That is the ugly. That is the ugly, and that's a real disempowerment.
Yeah.
Right.
He left, by the way, because of that. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, and that's kind of leads us into a conversation about toxicity, right? And you know, can we really solve this answer, right? If I've got to a level of if I've got to be the CEO, right, and I've done that by being the hero in the room, by just making everyone else do what I want them to do.
Yes.
And can you ever solve that?
So this is what we're doing at Ipsos, because we realized. So I ended up coaching a few executives, and I realized that there was a huge limit in coaching individuals when it was actually their team that needed coaching, the leadership team. And I because I could give all the strategic advice and my knowledge of the executive world and how things work and how she could improve her prospects but it was the people around her that needed to change, really. So I that's why we started Ipsos. Is just went back to research. How do you change a certain group mentality? And so the two answers I have is, well, firstly, it can be changed, but I'll talk about how people are trying to change it at the moment. First is they recognize that it's a problem. And most companies, upon becoming an executive, you get a complimentary facility of coaching or something. So, hey, here's your personal coach. And in some companies, they say you have to have a coach.
Yes. Yes.
So whatever issues you have in your life, go and sort it out with this person and come back a better person. I like this approach in the sense that it understands that there are deeper issues. The problem is it's a long term. Anyone who's done any sort of coaching, these are long term issues, and by the time the effects are brought to bear, the person has probably moved on. If you're talking about dealing with someone's anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes attention, whatever it is, so that will have limits on the company, and the second thing that they do, which is far more common, is either the head of L&D or the head of HR will say, well, we take our executives on a nice weekend away for a team building thing, and we book a nice hotel, perhaps abroad, and we make sure they go through these, they get to know a bit more about each other and increase trust and collaboration, and we take them through these exercises. To which I reply, well, you're calling me because you've got a problem. Did these things work? Absolutely not, they say. And that's simply because there's too much at stake in the C-suite for you to solve these deep issues of trust just by getting to know one another outside. So these won't go far enough. So how it can be solved is you hit the nail on the head when you talked about focusing on a process and not an individual in one of your examples. And that's what we've done, because the CPO or sometimes someone else in the C-suite will say, hey, Siano, we've got a real problem in this, in our team. I can't go to them and say, hey, you're a narcissist, and so here's someone who's going to come and help us all. That's never going to land, and that's actually the worst thing you can do to someone with that personality. What we have honed down is say that one of the biggest proxies of trust is sharing information and sharing of knowledge, and so we introduce. We basically evaluate what we call the knowledge ecosystem, which is why our training is called business epistemology. Epistemology is a fancy name for theory of knowledge. And we make people nodes of that system rather than focusing on the individuals itself. And what we've seen is that has an 81% chance of receptibility. People will say, executive people in these nodes will say, I'm far more willing to see how I can improve how I share knowledge and how knowledge gets to me, knowledge that I really want to have, that I know that other person will not share, or whatever. So the fact that it increases receptibility is a huge is a huge plus. So it is an innovation. If we had this conversation in about 3-5 years time, then I could say, right, Sarah, 400 out of 1,000 of Ipsis's clients or whatever, they went through this process and they genuinely felt a huge increase in trust and collaboration in the C-suite. But we're still quite new, so
Right.
that's where we're going.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What is so? Because if I went to quite a lot of C-suites, they would go, we share knowledge. We share our strategy, we share our performance, we share our financials. Right? What are you sharing that is different here?
Well, you basically just talk to so that's the face that they will give to someone on the outset. Look at how good we are. Look at how collaborative we are. Look at how diverse, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it just starts with individual sessions of the C-suite members, and the rest comes out. Actually, Siano, we don't share knowledge. Actually, Siano, I'm highly frustrated by this and that individual. It came out in executive search so easily because a candidate would have to talk to many members of the C-suite, and you just learn what they think about each other.
Right.
So it actually doesn't take much
Right.
for people to admit their internal frustrations. You'd be surprised, oh gosh, if I was to throw in a probability, maybe half the people we spoke to,
Right.
not candidates, hiring they would come to us, they would say, oh, and by the way, if you have anything else or any other roles for my role, vacancies for my role, let me know because I'm not too happy with the situation.
Right. Whoa, interesting. I think there's I always talk about data. I talk about data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, right?
Yes.
And they are different, right? And we can drown in data.
Yes.
There is an art to making that data into information, which can then be used.
Yes.
Right? There is an art to understanding how that information can then be applied, and that's kind of knowledge, and there's a bit of experience in there. And actually, and wisdom is that I've done this before. It's applying that experience. It's not just it's almost applying that experience to the data and to the information that allows you to go, that smells down there. Tell me more about this thing. And I think we get hung up on, or we can focus on data, but data can be weaponized in the same way that anything else can be weaponized.
Yes. So I should clarify, when I say sharing knowledge, it should be sharing, I think the broader term would be sharing resources, because data can be shared. They're huge systems that everyone can access. But for example, when two functions, they don't want to share clients, for example, or information about certain clients, it's that sort of stuff. Where both functions, both executives can win through that sharing, but they don't want to. But anyway, that.
And some of that is that actually they don't actually have the same data. They think they have the same data, but they don't.
Yes.
So that's a whole different.
That's a whole different story. Yes. So just to sum up, what would you tell someone who's trying to start their career in tech, would love to go to the top? What sort of advice would you give them?
My advice would be so spend time on your career. Don't assume it will happen. Right. So be active. Whatever you start in, you will end up somewhere different. So.
And that's a good thing.
And that's a good thing, right? I would also tell them that at some point, and I think this is particularly true of tech, you move from being the expert to being the generalist, right? And you will never, and actually, and you need to broaden. That is part of your growth.
Yes.
So you need to broaden as well. So I would tell them all that, and I would say, actually, don't underestimate the need to build your network, your collaboration, right? I have people today that I talk to that I worked with 40, no, not 40, no, not 40 years ago. I have people today that I worked with, you know,
Schoolmates,
30,
perhaps?
30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So you know, and LinkedIn is brilliant for that,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
I can, you know, I stay in contact with people, and I remember when I was putting my case forward for distinguished engineer in IBM, I contacted someone that I'd worked with 20 years before, right? And he was, and because I was back working with him, but actually, he was, you know, we had that connection, we had that, you know, and he was able to give me a reference, which was great. But so this building this network, maintaining this network is also critical.
Right. Okay.
And you might need to cut that to make that work.
Okay, that's very useful. And future of the C-suite, how do you think it's going to change, especially with technology becoming what it is?
I think so. You know, technology will, I believe, force people to think differently about their business models, right? And therefore, I think there will be organisational change, right, in a lot of businesses, in a lot of industries. The other thing that I think is that, particularly as we focus on sustainability, the need for people to collaborate across companies will become stronger and stronger.
Right. Okay.
So I think, you know, because, you know, this is not so much about winning a market anymore. This is about changing, you know, driving change, right? And I do think collaborating beyond boundaries will become more important as well.
Thank you. Well, Sarah Beasy, thank you very much.
Thank you.